Don't wear don't wear business. Don't wear business to in my wear. Don't wear don't wear business. Don't wear business to in my wear. Don't wear don't wear business.
Hello, I am Nicolene, here to assist you with Education 310. Today we're going to be looking at your scope and trying to intensely analyze everything that has been there, because according to your scope you have to have a very good understanding of those terms. So we have critical thinking in education, we have autonomy, socialization, we have liberty, negative and positive, we have sociological understanding of education, we have the debates of the control of education, we have Plato, Hobbes, and Locke, which are the theories. We've got the fallacies in education. And then we have the state of nature, we have the allegory of the cave, we have personal, simple relativism and sophisticated personal relativism. We have satire and existential existentialism. We have John Stuart Mill's The Harm Principle. We have cultural relativism. We have morality in education. We have egoism. We have psychological and ethical egoism. We have utilitarianism. We have morality in religion, knowledge in education, social contract theory. We have Ubuntu, trends in African philosophy, and that very long VY Mudimbe and the colonial archive. That is very long. But I will try to just capture everything. Alright, so we will start off with critical thinking. So basically, critical thinking is not something that you can just spoon and define as naively or as simply as possible. Critical thinking, according to your textbooks, has to do with two main ideas. It has to do with a set of beliefs, and then it has to do with a critical thinker's evaluation or persuasion to evaluate present arguments. What am I saying? I'm saying that if you are to be a critical thinker, your role is to have a set of beliefs and to analyze the set of beliefs that are around you. And then you will then try to break them down and present a persuasive argument as to whether those beliefs are to stand or not. So when you are a critical thinker, you are thinking beyond the obvious. You are digging deep. You are trying to find the solutions where there's a dismal, non-solutive situation. You are trying to now become more than just a thinker. You critically think, you dig deep, you go beyond the obvious, you are now trying to find solutions. And now the focus on critical thinking is obviously around the era of the new democracy in South Africa, where in your textbook, in page, okay, I don't have a page here, it is in chapter 10, I believe you will find chapter 10 in your books. It says, our understanding of the concept of critical thinking has changed considerably over the last 20 years. In the 1990s, with the inauguration of the new South Africa, critical thinking was a powerful tool for challenging prejudices relating to apartheid. So now, if the question arises as to what role critical thinking played after 1994, you will then have to look that it challenged prejudices related to apartheid. What are you talking about? The challenging prejudices that were related to apartheid. You're talking about the laws that were passed, especially pertaining to education during the 60s and the 70s. You will then recall the 1976 uprising. You will then recall all the events that led to a new South Africa. You will recall the oppression, the discrimination. You will recall everything that was meant to enhance and empower apartheid during that time. It carries on to say critical thinkers who were aligned with liberation policies operated in context of extremes. Liberation versus the status quo, freedom versus enslavement, democracy versus totalitarianism. So, what is this book saying? It's saying that critical thinkers were aligned with liberation politics. So, if you are a critical thinker, your main aim and your one ambition is to seek liberation from a constrained view of thinking. You are then challenging others to also move away from the norm of being spoon fed, of taking things as they are, but challenging the norm, wanting to seek liberation of the mind, liberation of the status quo, liberation of freedom, of enslavement, of democracy, of totalitarianism. So when you look at apartheid and that situation at that era, you would find that there was a certain race that was not allowed to critically think. There was a certain race that was meant to be gullible, that was meant to let the teacher in the classroom think for them, tell them what to do and how to do it. A learner back then, I believe, was not allowed to challenge a teacher. Therefore, there was no room for critical thinking. Okay, so now we will move on to trying to engage more on what critical thinking expects of us. The book says, I'm reading from 10.2, key aspects of critical thinking. It says it has been suggested that critical thinking must proceed from within a defined set of beliefs that for all purposes we can call a field. In medicine, for instance, we make reference to a field by pointing out its distinctive areas and practices. Doctors thus operate within the field of anatomy, pathology, immunology, and so forth. So now what are they saying? Critical thinking goes deeper then to defining a certain context. So in medicine, you will hear things like immunology, pathology, and anatomy. What are they talking about? It is talking about you trying to define a medical situation where it needs a certain type of thinking. So when you are in education, there will be a certain type of field that requires you to have a certain type of thinking. So you cannot be using general information if you are then critically thinking. Let's make an example of education. If you are critically thinking in education, you will look at the different fields as well, like the field of the early childhood development. You will look at the field of the foundation phase. You will look at the field of the intermediate and senior, the senior and FET, and so forth. In each and every phase, there is a type of beliefs that are there, and those beliefs are then leading you to be persuasive in a certain view on or context. So if you are thinking you are a student in the ECD foundation phase, your type of thinking will be different from that of a senior and FET type of student. So when you are in senior FET, you think in a certain way, and your critical thinking plays out in a certain manner as well. And then when you're looking at ECD Foundation, critical thinking there plays the role of mainly focusing on child psychology. That's why you find that there isn't any methodology that is done in ECD Foundation, but the methods are emphasized from senior and FET, for example. When you are emphasizing the methodology there and the approaches in the classroom, you are emphasizing the skill enlisting in the classroom. But then if you are in ECD, you are being emphasized to focus mainly on how a learner learns, for example. I hope you are all following. But if you have any more questions for critical thinking, I'll be more than happy to add on what I've already said. Okay, so right now we're going to be moving on to autonomy. When you look at the word autonomy, it is broken down to bring about two words. Auto means self, and nomos means law. So you're talking about a person who is self-governed, self-ruled. It is a person who is, we would say, an independent thinker, a person who takes their own decisions at their own time, a person who is a non-conformist, a person who does not obligate themselves to follow a certain crowd, a person who is able to stick out and stand out. Okay, let's see what the book says. For some time, it has been argued that autonomy, or what we will call it we will later refer to as personal autonomy, is one of the crucial aims of education. Although this is being disputed today, it is just important for us to decide whether autonomy is still a core concept in the field of education or whether it belongs somewhere in the periphery as a useful concept, but not a crucial one. The case study that follows raises questions about an act that may or may not be considered autonomous. It is intended to help you identify which qualities you associate with autonomy so that you can be able to make your own evaluation of the situation. So basically, the case study was talking about a Muslim girl named Karun. She was very young. She was brought up at a private religious school in Cape Town that emphasized religious involvement. So, according to comments made by her teachers, she was a very obedient learner, never showing disrespect or being objectionable in any way. So, one morning she decided to board a flight to Syria, where she was determined to join the ISIS. The ISIS is then well known as the Muslims, it is said it's Muslims, who are suicide bombers. Okay, so suicide bombing is basically, in that Islamic belief, a way of an ultimate sacrifice to Allah. Okay, so now the question is, was Karun acting autonomously or not? You can say that she was acting autonomously because she did not consult anyone about her decision. She decided to board her flight. She must have been very rich. And, well, she went to the Islamic State and she became a member of the ISIS. So, how do we now define autonomy? Or is autonomy possible? Is autonomy something that can occur? Let us look at the classroom context. You are in the classroom, and an obvious person that can be autonomous in the classroom is the teacher, right? Let's look at a rebellious child. Nobody tells the child to be rebellious. Can you say that that child is autonomous? Yes. Let's look at an excelling child. Yes, with the influence of the teacher, with the influence of everyone else, or because of competition, the child can be said to just be a smart child. But then can you not say that that person is autonomous because they work hard? So, what is autonomy? Autonomy is basically a person who has their own rules that they follow because of what they feel or what they want to do at that time. Okay, so now we are moving on to discovering more about what they're saying in the book about autonomy. They're saying, setting aside the issue of whether or not Muslims have an obligation to join ISIS, the question that we'll consider is, has Karun acted autonomously, as it is with all other concepts such as freedom? On what we understand by autonomy. What are the crucial features of this concept? Okay, number one, the etymological origin of the word autonomy is the Latin word auto, meaning self, and nomos, meaning law. When combined, they refer to a person who acts according to his or her laws, as I was saying earlier. That is, who is self-legislating or self-directing in terms of his or her beliefs. Okay. As a concept, the notion of autonomy has numerous components. We shall explore these questions in a way of clarifying its meaning. Okay, there are a few questions that you can go through in the book, but basically the issue of autonomy is self-governing, self-rule, it is self-law, self-legislation, self-directing. Okay, I believe we can move on to socialization right now. Socialization. That is in the same chapter. It is 10.2.2. So basically, these are concepts in education. So if the short question arises and you're asked, what is critical thinking? You will then define critical thinking as the ability to be able to think out of the box, to be able to analyze situations, to be able to dig deeper and go beyond the obvious. When you're critically thinking, you will have to be faced with a set of beliefs where you seek a certain type of liberation in order to remove it or to explore more ways of not being in a situation which constrains a person from being independent in their thinking. And then if you're also to describe or to define rather autonomy, you'll basically talk about self-rule or self-legislation. You're talking about a person who is able to follow their own rules and their own laws without being directed. It is a self-directing person who follows their own legislation. We're not talking about socialization. 10.2.2 says, we now examine another key concept in education, socialization, which is a recognition of the importance of schools is preparing children for social life. In the previous section, introduced us briefly to this concept. We shall consider this concept in more detail, paying particular attention to the difference between socialization and autonomy as educational goals. What would a person who has experienced no or very little socialization be like? So now let's look at socialization. Socialization will basically be referring to an experience that you gain in being socialized into a certain context. Socialization is an ever-recurring concept. It is an ever-recurring experience. Once you are socialized in a situation, it occurs in your family, it occurs in your community, it occurs at school, it occurs in the classroom, outside the classroom, it occurs in everyday life. Socialization, therefore, is not static. Socialization, therefore, is not limited. Socialization is also not by choice. Why am I saying it's not by choice? Because you may have your own opinions, but once you get in contact with another person, those opinions are most likely to change. Okay, so now we're taking a deeper look on what socialization is. The book says, according to the notion of socialization, socialization can be divided into two types of socializations. There's thin socialization and thick socialization. This other time when I was speaking about thin socialization, I was talking about an instance where the learner is socialized when he or she is exposed to an intentional instruction by the teacher. You can say that thin socialization is formal socialization. It is only directed by the teacher and it is received by the learner. Thin socialization refers to an instance where the learner is there for the objective to be met, which was set by the teacher. That's thin socialization. If the teacher gives an instruction, open your books, that is socialization. The learner opens their book. When the teacher gives the instruction, do your work at 10.2.2, you will do your work. So why is it thin socialization? Because it is formal, it is not constructed by more than one person. It is a type of socialization that occurs within the confines of the classroom. And when you're looking at thin socialization, it can also occur within the confines of the office, where the principal is socializing the teachers. It can also occur in the confines of the workplace, or I was talking about the workplace, sorry, can occur in the confines of a home, of the family setting, where the parents are now socializing with morality and ethical behavior their children. It can also occur in the church, where the preacher stands in front and socializes the church into a certain way of belief or faith. So socialization can be defined as thin socialization when there is an intentional instruction and it is directed by that person. Okay, it is formal, it is carrying with it a set of instructions. It is carrying with it a set of norms that those who are being socialized ought to take in and welcome. Okay. Now, isibugu. Socialization of this thin variety also happens in the classroom by means of the way in which lessons are taught. The teacher requires the class to sit quietly and be attentive. So whenever there is an instruction given and you come in contact with a boss, with a parent, with a teacher, know that type of socialization is thin, because there is a variety of ways that a person will do things and will expect you to receive them. Right. Now, we are going to be moving on to thick socialization. In contrast, socialization in the thick sense takes place in the other parts of school. Here, learners acquire norms, attitudes, and beliefs, often inadvertently, simply by being in contact with others. It's that simple. Thick socialization is informal, thick socialization is spontaneous, thick socialization is unplanned. There is no instruction. No one tells a learner to go and become friends with another learner. Nobody tells the learner not to talk to a certain person when they're going to the loo. Nobody tells the learner not to say anything when they want to buy something at the tuck shop. Thick socialization is something that occurs, or it's the type of socialization that occurs in various types of ways. It is a type of socialization that occurs spontaneously, without being planned, without having a certain type of instruction. If you have any more questions based on socialization, please drop in a comment. Okay. I believe now we're going to be moving on to indoctrination, but I do not see indoctrination your in your scope, so I think we can skip it.